In the flickering torchlight of a grand medieval hall, a wedding feast unfolded with a splendor that masked a deadly secret, so sinister it would erase an entire royal bloodline in a single horrifying night. On a crisp autumn evening in 1120, within the stone walls of a Norman castle, laughter and music echoed as goblets clinked in celebration, unaware that poison coursed through the very wine they raised in toast. This was no mere union of noble houses. It was a meticulously orchestrated trap, a banquet of betrayal that would plunge a kingdom into chaos and leave historians whispering of treachery for centuries. Welcome to the chilling tale of the poisoned wedding feast, a moment where ambition turned deadly, and an entire lineage was snuffed out in the shadows of revelry. To understand the gravity of this night, we must step back into the turbulent world of 12th century Europe, a time when power was forged through marriage alliances and broken by the blade, or, in this case, by a subtler, more insidious weapon. The setting is the Duchy of Normandy, a land of fierce warriors and cunning lords, where the balance of power teetered on the edge of every union. At the heart of our story is the fictional House of Varon, a prominent Norman family whose lineage traced back to the companions of William the Conqueror, and their rivals, the House of Montfort, whose envy simmered beneath every courteous bow. The wedding was meant to unite these houses, binding the young heir of Varennes, Lord Baldwin, to Lady Eleanor of Montfort, a match brokered to end decades of territorial disputes and bloodshed over fertile lands along the Seine. Yet beneath the surface of this diplomatic triumph, darker currents flowed, currents of resentment, greed, and a hunger for dominance that no marriage contract could quench. The year 1120 was a pivotal one for Normandy, as King Henry I of England, also Duke of Normandy, sought to consolidate his rule after years of conflict with rebellious barons and external threats from France. Marriages like that of Baldwin and Eleanor were not mere personal affairs. They were political chess moves, designed to secure loyalty and strengthen the king's grip on his fractious vassals. Baldwin, a charismatic but naive young lord of 22, inherited his father's title only a year prior, stepping into a world of intrigue he was ill-prepared to navigate. His bride, Eleanor, 18 and renowned for her beauty, carried the weight of her family's ambitions, whispered in the halls of Montfort that this marriage was but a stepping stone to greater power. The Varennes family, proud and wealthy, controlled key trade routes and boasted a private army that rivaled even the king's levies, making them both indispensable allies and dangerous potential enemies. Their castle, a fortress of gray stone perched on a hill overlooking the river, was the stage for this fateful feast, its great hall adorned with tapestries of past victories, now to witness an unparalleled tragedy. But the seeds of this disaster were sown long before the wedding bells rang. For years, the Montforts had chafed under the shadow of the Varennes, their lands less fertile, their influence waning as their rivals grew in favor with the crown. Whispers of sabotage and skirmishes over border villages had marked their rivalry, each side accusing the other of betrayal at every turn. The marriage was King Henry's decree, a forced reconciliation that neither family truly desired, though both played their parts with smiles and oaths of fealty. Behind closed doors, however, plans were hatched, plans that turned the wedding feast into a battlefield where no sword was drawn, but where death would strike with silent precision. The guest list read like a roster of Normandy's elite: barons, knights, bishops, and even emissaries from the English court, all gathered to witness what they believed was the dawn of peace. Little did they know, they were walking into a trap so cunningly laid that history would struggle to untangle who truly held the vial of poison. As preparations for the feast reached their peak, the castle buzzed with activity. Cooks labored over spits of venison and boar, while servants polished silver and arranged tables laden with bread, cheese, and barrels of the finest wine imported from Gascony. Minstrels tuned their lutes, and jesters practiced their jests, oblivious to the undercurrent of tension that tightened with every passing hour. Baldwin, dressed in a tunic of deep blue embroidered with his family's crest, greeted guests with a warmth that belied his unease. He had heard rumors of Montfort discontent, but dismissed them as petty gossip. Eleanor, veiled and radiant, descended the stone staircase to murmurs of admiration, her eyes betraying a flicker of something unreadable, fear, perhaps, or resolve. Outside, the autumn wind howled, rattling the shutters as if warning of the storm to come. Within these walls, over 100 souls gathered to celebrate, unaware that by morning the House of Varon would be no more, their bloodline extinguished in a single, poisoned breath. This is where our story begins, at the precipice of disaster, where ambition and betrayal collided in a feast that would echo through the annals of history. The stage is set, the players assembled, and the poison literal and metaphorical waits to strike. What drove the Montforts, or perhaps another unseen hand, to commit such an unthinkable act? How did a night of celebration turn into a massacre that shocked even a world accustomed to violence? As we delve deeper, the layers of intrigue will unravel, revealing the human cost of power and the fragility of trust in a time when loyalty was as fleeting as the wind. As the wedding feast commenced within the grand hall of the Varennes castle, the air was thick with the scent of roasted meats and the murmur of forced pleasantries. But beneath the surface, a storm of envy and betrayal brewed with lethal intent. The long oak tables groaned under the weight of platters, and candlelight danced across the faces of nobles who smiled through gritted teeth, their eyes darting with suspicion even as they raised their goblets in toasts to the newlyweds. Lord Baldwin, seated at the high table beside his bride Eleanor, seemed the picture of youthful optimism, his laughter ringing out as he clasped her hand, oblivious to the undercurrents of malice that swirled around them. Yet, for those with sharper instincts, the tension was palpably a coiled serpent waiting to strike, hidden in the clinking of cups and the hollow cheers of alliance. The roots of this discord stretched deep into the past, nourished by years of rivalry between the houses of Varennes and Montfort, a feud that no royal decree could fully extinguish. The Montforts, though outwardly compliant with King Henry I's command for peace through marriage, harbored a resentment that festered like a wound. Their patriarch, Lord Godfrey of Montfort, a gaunt man with a hawkish gaze, sat near the high table, his thin lips curled in a smile that never reached his eyes as he watched Baldwin jest with his knights. Godfrey had lost much to the Varennes over the decades, lands seized in border disputes, influence at court diminished by their rivals' favor, and a younger brother killed in a skirmish blamed on Varennes treachery. To him, this wedding was not a union but a humiliation, a reminder of his family's decline, and whispers among his retinue suggested he had no intention of letting the Varennes revel in their triumph. His presence at the feast, flanked by his most loyal retainers, felt less like celebration and more like a war council disguised in finery. Eleanor, the bride at the center of this storm, was no mere pawn, though her role was shrouded in ambiguity that only heightened the unease. Raised in the Montfort household, she had been schooled in the art of courtly grace, but also in the subtler craft of survival amidst intrigue. Her dowry included lands that would bolster Varennes wealth, a bitter pill for her father Godfrey to swallow, and some whispered she had been instructed to spy on her new husband, to ferret out weaknesses that could be exploited later. Yet, as she sat beside Baldwin, her delicate fingers tracing the stem of her goblet, there was a tremor in her posturia, sign of fear perhaps, or guilt. Did she know of a darker plan unfolding around her? Her occasional glances toward her father's table hinted at a secret burden, a weight that threatened to crush the fragile hope of this marriage before it could even take root. The Varennes, for their part, were not blind to the Montforts' cold demeanor, but Baldwin's mother, Lady Isolde, a stern woman who had seen her share of political games, dismissed the tension as mere posturing, urging her son to focus on the future rather than old grudges. Adding to the volatile mix were other players at the feast, each with their own stakes in the outcome of this union. A delegation from the English court, sent by King Henry himself, observed the proceedings with hawk-like scrutiny, their presence a reminder that any discord here could ripple across the channel and threaten the stability of the realm. Among them was Sir Ralph de Beaumont, a trusted advisor to the king, whose sharp mind missed little. He noted the Montforts' whispered conferences and the way their servants lingered near the wine barrels, though he could not yet fathom the depth of their intent. Local barons, too, had their own grievances. Some envied the Varennes' wealth, others distrusted the Montforts' ambition, and all feared being caught in the crossfire of a feud reignited. Even the clergy, represented by Bishop Anselm of Rouen, seemed uneasy. His sermons on unity during the wedding ceremony earlier that day now feeling like hollow words as he watched the two families exchange barbed pleasantries over the feast. As the night wore on, small incidents began to stoke the flames of distrust into something more dangerous. A Montfort knight, emboldened by wine, made a cutting remark about Varennes honor within earshot of Baldwin's younger brother Edgar, a hot-headed youth of 16 who nearly drew his dagger before being restrained by his kin. Servants from both houses exchanged glares as they passed in the crowded hall, and a spilled goblet, whether by accident or designed to a heated exchange that required Lady Isolde's sharp intervention to prevent a brawl. These were but sparks, yet they hinted at a greater fire, one that needed only the right catalyst to erupt. The minstrels played on, their lively tunes a jarring contrast to the growing sense of foreboding, while outside, the autumn wind howled louder, as if nature itself sensed the calamity brewing within these ancient walls. The true danger, however, lay not in open conflict but in the shadows, where unseen hands moved with deadly precision. Rumors had reached Baldwin's ears in the days leading up to the wedding, whispers of Montfort agents seeking out apothecaries in distant towns, of strange vials smuggled under cloaks, though he had laughed them off as the paranoia of overzealous spies. Yet, as the feast progressed, certain Montfort retainers seemed overly attentive to the flow of wine, their movements near the serving tables too deliberate to be mere coincidence. A young page, loyal to the Varennes, later swore he saw a man slip something into a cask, though fear kept him silent until it was too late. The poison, if indeed it was there, waited patiently, its presence a silent specter amidst the revelry, ready to transform this night of celebration into an indelible tragedy. This mounting tension, this dance of suspicion and hidden malice, set the stage for the horrors to come. The wedding feast, meant to be a bridge between warring houses, had instead become a battleground of intrigue, where every smile hid a dagger and every toast masked a curse. As the hour grew late and the guests grew merry with drink, the trap was poised to spring, its architects watching with cold calculation. Who among them held the key to this deadly plot, and what drove them to risk everything for such a catastrophic act? The answers lie ahead, as the night darkens and the true cost of ambition begins to unfold. As the wedding feast stretched into the late hours within the Varennes Castle's great hall, the veneer of celebration began to crack under the weight of unspoken grudges, each forced laugh and strained toast a prelude to disaster. The flickering candles cast long shadows across the stone walls, mirroring the darkness that crept into the hearts of those gathered, while the once lively music of the minstrels now seemed a mournful dirge to ears attuned to danger. Lord Baldwin, still seated at the high table with his bride Eleanor, remained blissfully unaware of the storm gathering around him, his cheeks flushed with wine as he shared a jest with his closest knights. But for others, the signs were impossible to ignore. The air was charged with a menace that no amount of feigned merriment could dispel, a sense that this night would end not in unity, but in ruin. The friction between the houses of Varennes and Montfort, already a smoldering ember, flared with every passing moment, fueled by words and deeds that cut deeper than any blade. Lord Godfrey of Montfort, his gaunt frame rigid with barely concealed contempt, watched the proceedings with the cold calculation of a predator, his fingers tightening around his goblet as Baldwin's laughter echoed through the hall. To Godfrey, Every gesture of Varan dominance, every toast led by Baldwin, every admiring glance at the young lord's wealth and vigor was a personal affront, a reminder of his own family's diminished standing. His retainers, sensing their lord's mood, grew bolder in their provocations. One, a scarred knight named Sir Hugh, deliberately bumped into a Varan squire, spilling ale and muttering an insult about upstart lords that drew angry glares and clenched fists. Only the swift intervention of Lady Isolde, Baldwin's steely mother, prevented the altercation from escalating, though her sharp words to Godfrey about controlling his men were met with a smirk that promised no peace. Eleanor, caught between her new husband and her father's simmering rage, became a silent fulcrum of the growing discord, her pale face a mask of conflicting emotions as the night wore on. She had been raised to obey, to serve her family's interests above all. Yet the warmth in Baldwin's touch and the genuine kindness in his eyes stirred something in her a flicker of hope for a life beyond the schemes of her kin. But that hope was shadowed by fear. She had overheard fragments of hushed conversations in the days before the wedding, cryptic warnings from her father's steward about ensuring the future and a final reckoning. Did she suspect the true nature of the danger? Her hands trembled as she lifted her goblet, her eyes darting to the Montfort table where her brother, a sullen youth named Roland, avoided her gaze, his own expression one of grim determination. Eleanor's inner turmoil was a microcosm of the larger conflict, a personal battle between loyalty and love that threatened to shatter under the weight of what was to come. Beyond the central feud, other currents of intrigue rippled through the hall, each guest a potential spark in the powder keg of this ill-fated feast. Sir Ralph de Beaumont, the king's emissary, grew increasingly uneasy as he observed the Montforts' behavior, noting how their servants seemed to hover near the wine casks with an attentiveness that felt unnatural. He whispered to his aide to keep a close watch, though he lacked the evidence to act yet. Meanwhile, lesser barons, sensing the brewing storm, began to position themselves, some currying favor with the Varens in hopes of future alliances, others murmuring to Montfort allies in case the balance of power shifted. Even Bishop Anselm, who had blessed the union mere hours ago, now clutched his crucifix with a fervor that spoke of dread, his prayers for peace drowned out by the clatter of plates and the rising voices of discontent. The hall, once a place of revelry, had transformed into a chessboard where every move carried deadly stakes, and the players were poised for a checkmate no one could predict. The most insidious threat, however, remained hidden, woven into the very fabric of the feast itself. The wine, poured freely from ornate casks, flowed into every goblet, its rich aroma masking a secret that only a few knew: a poison, subtle and slow-acting, rumored to have been procured from a shadowy apothecary in Paris at great cost. Whispers of such a plot had reached the Varan household in the preceding weeks, but Baldwin, ever trusting, had dismissed them as baseless fear-mongering, unwilling to believe that even the Montforts would stoop to such cowardice. Yet, as the night deepened, certain signs could not be ignored. A Montfort servant, pale and sweating, avoided eye contact as he refilled pitchers, while another was seen slipping out to the courtyard, perhaps to signal an accomplice. A young Varan page, tasked with tasting his lord's drink, hesitated before sipping, his instincts screaming of danger, though loyalty compelled him to swallow. The poison, if it was there, waited with the patience of death itself, its presence a silent promise of devastation amidst the clamor of celebration. As the hour approached midnight, the tension reached a fever pitch, every word and glance laden with unspoken accusations. A toast proposed by Godfredo, the enduring strength of Normandy, carried a double edge that made Lady Isolde's eyes narrow, her hand resting on the dagger hidden beneath her sleeve. Baldwin, sensing the shift in mood, attempted to lighten the atmosphere with a call for a dance, pulling Eleanor to her feet with a boyish grin, but even the swirl of skirts and the strum of lutes could not mask the undercurrent of hostility. Outside, the wind howled with renewed fury, rattling the shutters as if to warn of the catastrophe looming within. The feast, meant to forge a lasting bond, had instead become a crucible of betrayal, where old wounds bled anew and new ones were poised to be inflicted with ruthless precision. This was the tipping point, the moment where suspicion hardened into certainty for some, and where innocence stood on the brink of annihilation. The poisoned wedding feast was no longer a mere possibility but a gathering storm, its first drops of tragedy ready to fall. Who among the gathered nobles would strike the fatal blow, and who would fall victim to a plot so vile it defied the very codes of honor they claimed to uphold? The answers lie in the harrowing hours ahead, as the night descends into a darkness from which there is no return. As midnight tolled through the Varan castle, the wedding feast, once a tableau of forced gaiety, descended into a grim theater of suffering, the first tendrils of poison weaving their silent, deadly path through the unsuspecting revelers. The great hall, bathed in the dim glow of dying candles, grew heavy with an unnatural stillness, the laughter and music fading as the first signs of distress rippled through the crowd. Lord Baldwin, still at the high table with Eleanor by his side, felt a sudden tightness in his chest, a burning in his throat he attributed to too much wine, brushing it off with a weak smile as he squeezed his bride's hand. But the truth, far darker than overindulgence, was beginning to manifest a sinister force, hidden in the very goblets they had raised in toast, now tightened its grip on the House of Varan and all who shared their table. The poison, a vile concoction rumored to be derived from deadly nightshade and arsenic, worked with insidious precision, its effects creeping in slowly to avoid immediate suspicion. At first, the symptoms were subtle sweat beading on foreheads, a faint dizziness dismissed as fatigue, a bitter aftertaste lingering on tongues. Lady Isolde, Baldwin's fierce mother, was among the first to sense something amiss, her sharp eyes catching the pallor spreading across her son's face as he coughed into his sleeve. She rose, her voice cutting through the murmurs to demand water, her maternal instinct screaming of danger even as her mind struggled to grasp the unthinkable. Around her, others began to falter, knights clutching their stomachs, barons loosening their collars as if to escape an invisible noose, and servants dropping trays with trembling hands. The Montfort table, however, remained eerily composed, Lord Godfrey's expression unreadable as he sipped sparingly from his cup, his retainers exchanging knowing glances that chilled the few who noticed. Eleanor, torn between horror and helplessness, watched Baldwin's condition worsen, her own heart pounding with a mix of dread and guilt as she realized the wine she had barely touched might be the source of this creeping agony. Her husband's breathing grew labored, his once vibrant eyes clouding with confusion as he murmured her name, seeking comfort she could not give. She turned to her father, Godfrey, her gaze pleading for an explanation, but his cold stare offered no solace, only a silent confirmation of a betrayal so profound it shattered any lingering hope of familial loyalty. Eleanor's hands shook as she supported Baldwin's head, her whispered apologies lost in the rising tide of panic that swept through the hall. She was trapped, not by chains, but by the weight of her heritage, a prisoner to a plot she had not devised but could not escape, her new family crumbling before her eyes, while her old one stood as the architects of their doom. The decline of the Varans was not merely physical but a profound unraveling of their very legacy, each gasp and groan a blow to the pride and power they had built over generations. Baldwin's younger brother, Edgar, a fiery youth who had earlier bristled at Montfort insults, now lay slumped against a bench, his face contorted in pain as he clawed at his throat, his dreams of knighthood and glory snuffed out by a poison he never saw coming. Lady Isolde, fighting through her own nausea, moved among her kin with a desperate strength, barking orders to fetch healers and antidotes, though deep down she knew it was feudally medieval medicine, stood little chance against such a calculated venom. The castle's physician, An elderly man, summoned in haste, could only shake his head as he examined the victims, muttering of toxins beyond his knowledge, his hands trembling as he realized the scale of the catastrophe. Guests who had come to celebrate now found themselves imprisoned by their own failing bodies, their status and wealth powerless against the silent killer that coursed through their veins. Amidst the suffering, accusations began to fly, though they were weak and disjointed, born of pain rather than proof. Sir Ralph de Beaumont, the king's emissary, struggled to maintain his composure as he pointed a wavering finger at the Montforts, his voice hoarse as he demanded answers, only to be met with Godfrey's icy denial and a feigned concern that fooled no one. Bishop Anselm doubled over in prayer, wept openly as he begged for divine intervention, his faith shaken by the sheer malice of the act unfolding before him. Lesser barons and knights, those still able to speak, cursed their hosts and their rivals alike, their alliances fracturing under the weight of shared agony. The hall, once a place of feasting, had become a prison of despair, its stone walls echoing with moans and pleas for mercy that would not come. Outside, the autumn wind howled as if in mourning, the castle itself seeming to shudder at the horror within, its ancient stones bearing witness to a tragedy that would stain its history forever. The true imprisonment, however, was not just in the physical torment but in the realization of betrayal, the dawning horror that trust between families, between allies, between husband and wife had been weaponized against them. Baldwin, as his strength ebbed, looked into Eleanor's tear-streaked face, searching for answers, his mind grappling with the possibility that the woman he had vowed to love might be complicit in his undoing. Isolde, watching her son fade, felt a rage as potent as the poison itself, her thoughts turning to vengeance even as her body betrayed her, her resolve to protect her bloodline now a hollow promise. The Varennes, once a pillar of Norman power, were reduced to victims in their own home, their decline a public spectacle for their enemies to savor. And as the first lives began to slip away, the full scope of this massacre Lumita bloodline on the brink of extinction, a legacy poisoned not just by venom, but by the very ambition that had once made them great. This was the darkest hour before the final blow, a descent into suffering where hope withered and the bonds of kinship turned to ash. The poisoned wedding feast had claimed its first casualties, but the worst was yet to come, as death prepared to reap its full harvest. Who would survive to tell of this night, and what price would be paid for such a monstrous act of treachery? The answers lie in the harrowing climax ahead, as the House of Varennes faces its ultimate reckoning. As the first gray light of dawn crept through the narrow windows of Varennes Castle, the great hall lay under a pall of death, the wedding feast transformed into a charnel house, where the poison's deadly work reached its horrifying peak. The air, once filled with the clink of goblets and strains of music, now carried only the ragged gasps of the dying and the stifled sobs of those few who still clung to life. Lord Baldwin, the young heir whose marriage was meant to herald a new era, lay slumped in his high seat, his once vibrant face now a mask of agony, his lips tinged blue as the venom tightened its merciless grip on his heart. Beside him, Eleanor clutched his hand, her tears falling unchecked as she whispered futile words of love, her voice breaking under the weight of a loss so profound it seemed to tear the very soul from her body. This was the climax of a betrayal so monstrous that it would echo through history, a night where an entire royal bloodline was extinguished in a single brutal stroke. The poison, a silent assassin crafted with chilling precision, now unleashed its full fury, sparing no one who had partaken of the tainted wine in any significant measure. Baldwin's mother, Lady Isolde, who had fought so fiercely to save her family, collapsed near her son, her steely resolve shattered as her body convulsed, her final breath a curse against the Montforts she knew had orchestrated this doom. Edgar, Baldwin's fiery younger brother, lay lifeless on the cold stone floor, his youthful dreams of glory snuffed out before they could ever take root. his hand still reaching for a dagger he never had the chance to wield. Across the hall, knights and barons, their strength and titles meaningless against this invisible foe, perished in drovesome in silent resignation, others with guttural cries of rage and despair as they realized the depth of the treachery. The poison did not discriminate. It claimed Varennes loyalists and neutral guests alike, a sweeping scythe that left behind a tableau of twisted limbs and vacant stares. The once grand feast, now a graveyard of shattered lives. Eleanor, though spared the fatal dose perhaps by design or mere chance, endured a torment far worse than death as she bore witness to the annihilation of her new family. Her husband's final moments were etched into her memory with cruel clarity. Baldwin's eyes, clouded with pain, searching hers for answers. His weakening grip on her hand, a desperate plea for understanding as his life slipped away. She could offer no solace, no explanation, only the bitter truth that she had been a pawn in a game of unimaginable cruelty, whether by ignorance or complicity. Her sobs echoed in the near-silent hall, a haunting counterpoint to the occasional groan of a dying soul as she cradled Baldwin's head, his warmth fading with each passing second. Beyond her personal grief lay the staggering realization of the scale of this massacre, dozens upon dozens gone. The House of Varennes reduced to a name without heirs, its lineage severed in a single night of calculated malice. At the Montfort table, Lord Godfrey watched the carnage with a face of stone, his expression betraying neither remorse nor triumph, only a cold satisfaction that his family's long-standing rival was no more. His retainers, who had sipped sparingly from their own cups, stood as grim sentinels, their hands near their swords as if daring any survivor to challenge their unspoken victory. Yet, even among them, there was unease. Sir Hugh, the scarred knight who had provoked earlier tensions, shifted uncomfortably, his eyes avoiding the bodies strewn about, perhaps questioning the cost of such a ruthless act. Godfrey's son, Roland, Eleanor's brother, stared at his sister with a mix of pity and detachment, his silence a wall between them as she wept, a reminder that blood ties meant nothing in the face of ambition. The Montforts had won, but at a price that stained their honor indelibly, their victory a Pyrrhic one in a hall now reeking of death and betrayal. Sir Ralph de Beaumont, the king's emissary, clung to life by sheer will, his body racked with pain but his mind still sharp enough to grasp the magnitude of what had transpired. Propped against a pillar, his voice a hoarse whisper, he cursed Godfrey with his last reserves of strength, vowing that King Henry would hear of this atrocity, that justice would rain down upon the Montforts even if he did not live to see it. His words, though weak, carried a weight that pierced the oppressive silence, a final act of defiance against the architects of this slaughter. Bishop Anselm, too, survived, though barely, his prayers now a broken litany as he crawled among the fallen, offering last rites with trembling hands, his faith tested by a horror that seemed to mock the very notion of divine mercy. These few survivors bore witness to the end of the Varennes, their accounts destined to become the only record of a night that would shock even a world hardened by violence. The visual of this climax was as unforgettable as it was tragic, a hall of celebration turned tomb, where tapestries of past Varennes victories hung in cruel irony over the bodies of their last descendants. The long tables, still laden with uneaten food, stood as silent witnesses to the feast's abrupt end, goblets overturned, and wine staining the wood like blood. The flickering remnants of candlelight cast grotesque shadows, illuminating faces frozen in their final moments of anguish, a gallery of death that no artist could capture without shuddering. Outside, the dawn broke with a cold, indifferent light, the castle's walls standing as they always had, unmoved by the annihilation within, while the autumn wind carried away the last echoes of despair. This was the end of the House of Varennes, a bloodline wiped from existence not by war or plague, but by the quiet, insidious hand of poisoned death so personal, so deliberate, that it would haunt the annals of history. This night of unspeakable loss marked the pinnacle of treachery, a moment where ambition consumed all semblance of humanity, leaving behind only devastation. But what would become of the Montforts, of Eleanor, of the few who survived to carry the weight of this memory? And how would a kingdom react to the erasure of one of its mightiest houses? The aftermath awaits, as the echoes of this poisoned feast reverberate through time, demanding answers and reckoning. As the pale dawn fully broke over Varin Castle on that fateful autumn morning in 1120, the great hall stood as a silent mausoleum, the air thick with the stench of death and the weight of an unimaginable loss. The bodies of the House of Varin and their loyal retainers lay where they had fallen, their once proud lineage reduced to a grim tableau of poison's triumph, while the few survivors grappled with a reality too horrific to fully comprehend. Eleanor, the bride who had become a widow in mere hours, knelt beside Baldwin's lifeless form, her grief a raw wound that bled through her hollow stare, her future now a void as dark as the hall around her. The poisoned wedding feast had claimed its toll, wiping out an entire royal bloodline in a single night, but its reverberations would stretch far beyond these stone walls, reshaping the political landscape of Normandy and leaving a scar on history that time could never fully heal. In the immediate aftermath, the Montforts, the apparent architects of this massacre, moved with a cold efficiency that belied the chaos they had wrought. Lord Godfrey, his face an unreadable mask, ordered his retainers to secure the castle, claiming it as a necessary measure to maintain order in the wake of such tragedy, though his true intent was clear: to seize the wealth and lands of the fallen Varens before any could challenge their claim. His men stripped the Hall of Valuables under the guise of inventory, their actions a desecration of the dead that drew weak protests from the surviving clergy, including Bishop Anselm, whose voice trembled with both pain and outrage as he accused Godfrey of sacrilege. Yet, with no Varin heir to oppose them and most witnesses either dead or incapacitated, the Montforts faced little immediate resistance, their victory a bitter one built on a foundation of corpses. Eleanor, too broken to resist, was escorted back to her father's household, her status as a widow rendering her a pawn once more, her heart a battleground of guilt and sorrow as she carried the memory of Baldwin's final gaze. Word of the massacre spread like wildfire across Normandy and beyond, reaching the court of King Henry I with a speed matched only by the shock it inspired. Sir Ralph de Beaumont, though gravely weakened by the poison, survived long enough to dispatch a messenger to the king, his account of the Montforts' suspicious composure and the scale of the slaughter igniting a fury in the royal court. Henry, already wary of his fractious vassals, saw the annihilation of the Varens as both a personal affront and a dangerous precedent, a challenge to his authority that could not go unanswered. Within weeks, royal investigators descended upon the region. Their inquiries met with Montfort denials and carefully crafted alibis claims of a tainted wine shipment, of an unknown enemy seeking to destabilize the duchy. Though evidence of Godfrey's involvement was circumstantial, whispers of his ambition and past grievances fueled suspicion, and the king imposed heavy fines and stripped the Montforts of certain titles as a warning, though stopping short of outright war. The Montforts retained much of their ill-gotten gains, a bitter pill for those who sought justice, their name forever tainted by the shadow of that night. Eleanor's fate became a tragic footnote in the broader saga, her life a quiet descent into obscurity as she withdrew from the world that had betrayed her so cruelly. Confined to a Montfort manor, she refused to remarry, her days spent in prayer and solitude, haunted by the faces of the fallen and the weight of her unintended role in their demise. Some whispered she had known of the plot and done nothing, others that she was as much a victim as Baldwin, but the truth remained locked within her, a secret she carried to her grave years later, her passing unmarked by the chronicles that recorded her family's infamy. Her story, though, served as a poignant reminder of the human cost of political machinations. A young woman caught between love and loyalty, crushed by the ambitions of those around her. Meanwhile, the Varan castle, once a symbol of strength, fell into disrepair, its halls abandoned as if cursed, a ghostly monument to a bloodline erased, visited only by scavengers, and the occasional historian seeking to unravel the mystery of that poisoned feast. The legacy of the poisoned wedding feast endured not just in the political shifts it caused, but in the way it was remembered or deliberately forgotten by history. Chroniclers of the time, wary of Montfort influence or royal censure, often glossed over the event, recording it as a tragic accident rather than a calculated act of murder, their accounts sanitized to avoid further conflict. Yet, oral traditions among the Norman peasantry kept the darker truth alive. Tales of treachery and ghostly banquets whispered around hearths for generations, the Varens becoming a cautionary legend of trust betrayed. In the broader scope of medieval Europe, the event underscored the fragility of alliances in an era where power was often won through poison as much as the sword, a grim lesson for lords and kings alike that no feast, no marriage, no oath was beyond the reach of malice. The Montforts, though they gained land and wealth, never escaped the stain of suspicion, their names synonymous with betrayal in the quiet corners of courtly gossip, a hollow triumph that eroded their standing over time as allies grew wary of their ruthlessness. As we reflect on this chilling chapter of history, the poisoned wedding feast stands as a stark reminder of the depths to which ambition can drive humanity, where the bonds of family and honor are sacrificed on the altar of power. What drives a man to orchestrate such a massacre, to poison not just bodies but the very trust that holds a society together? And what of those left behind, like Eleanor, who must bear the weight of survival amidst such loss? These questions linger, echoing through the centuries, challenging us to consider the cost of vengeance and the fragility of peace in a world too often defined by conflict. If this story has stirred something in you, share your thoughts. Do you think history should remember the Varens? And what lessons can we draw from their tragic end? Let's keep this conversation alive, for in remembering we ensure that such horrors are never forgotten.